We now have our final policy keynote from Jennifer Morgan. I think just to give you the brief summary of what we've discussed today, I think what I heard from Rob Engler is what the Paris Agreement really changed. One of the things is that we started to focus on what is really essential, which is carbon emissions, CO2 and carbon sinks. So we're no longer talking about things around. We are really going to what we need to do. And I think we know what we need to do. And then we had a long discussion, as you can imagine, how to do it. And it's not easy, but to cite President Fabius, pessimism is not an option, and we need action. And I notice that your title, apart from State Secretary, Staatssekretärin, which of course sounds very good, your title is International Climate Action Special Envoy. So we are really looking forward to your keynote and to hear what action we can look forward to, because we need it. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening, everyone, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you in this evening slot, and I will do my best to maybe just share a few reflections with you and then go into dialogue, because I think it's also very good for people who are in government, in policy. I try as much as I can to maintain a constant dialogue with experts. Well, today we had our business day at our annual conference of all of our ambassadors. That's why it's been a full day, because we have all of our ambassadors from around the world in Berlin, and today was our day to have intensive exchanges with companies. But first of all, a big thank you for the invitation, and a special thank you to Ambassador as well. It's great to be here, and for me, when I receive an invitation to be working together with France, I try and do it however I can. Because I think Franco-German partnership and working together is more important than ever. And so thank you very much. I think, I was thinking back to a bit even before Paris, because before Paris, I can say that when I would say now that the climate crisis is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, security risks, long time, and foreign policy issues of our time, maybe for this audience, it doesn't seem all that controversial, but I can tell you when I would say this back in 1994, when I started, this coming out of a senior decision maker's mouth, well, it would have been seen as ridiculous. I think it's fair to say back then, and because I think a significant portion of governments and parliamentarians in Europe and in the U.S. thought that climate change was a niche environmental issue, and some thought it may someday impact some. I'm going to kind of go a little bit beyond, but some polar bears someday. And many others claimed that human-made climate change, well, it was a hoax. And I think nowadays these assessments, well, they would be, for the majority of the world, would be considered laughable or completely out of touch with reality. And although we still have policymakers who think it is a hoax, I think one can say, and speaking here with Nobel laureate, et cetera, that we're beyond that. And as we're about to celebrate the 10th birthday of the Paris Agreement, which was really a watershed in changing this narrative. So it's not only the focus, I think, that's definitely true. But I think when we signed and negotiated the Paris Agreement, climate impacts, well, they were very, very real for small island nations. They were very, very real for least developed countries. But for many, it was largely a bit far away. It was something that we were trying to prepare for the future. And now I think no country in the world is immune to the impacts that are happening, to the extreme impacts of the crisis. And so in a way, the climate crisis is a terrifying common experience. a crisis that can only be overcome by collaboration. And that's where I think the legal framework that Paris created to keep temperature rise below that 1.5 degree rise is a lasting legacy that endures with us until today. And I think French leadership, certainly Laurent Fabius, and also, if I may say, Laurence Toubiana, and the entire French machinery. Wow, respect. So really, I think that kind of leadership is what was needed then, and it's also what we need to continue to need now. Oftentimes, I think one of the census of Paris was that it gets a bit misconstrued that it's become a bottom-up instrument, where every country can do as it wishes. But actually, the Paris Agreement is a hybrid agreement, I would say, if I put my my climate policy wonk hat on. An agreement that is a legally binding agreement with legally binding provisions to report and verify emissions reductions, but a deep recognition that in the end, nations have to come together and create the political economy to move forward and build that ambition. So I probably don't need to go through how extreme the climate crisis is also for Europe. And what it looks like here, what we're experiencing here, also what it means for European solidarity. The Copernicus report recently found that actually we need to really be working together because the impacts are also going to hit disproportionately across Europe. So how do we work through that? But I think we know that there's no way to press pause. It's either we modernize now or we watch the impact spiral out of control. So pessimism is not an option. And radical collaboration, I would say, is the way we need to go. On the impacts, I just recommend to you, if you haven't seen it, Johan Rockström did a TED Talk a few weeks or months ago, about 6 weeks ago, I think. And if you want to get up to date on what's actually happening, I think that is a very quick way to do it, about where we are, but also about the irreversible tipping points that are coming our way. And I think that's, if you ask about energy and where one gets one energy and passion, I think the thought that there are irreversible things, I think that's very hard for our cultures to accept and to comprehend. We think we can fix things, but there are irreversible tipping points, whether they be the Amazon turning into a source rather than sink, whether it be the Greenland melting to a point where it's no longer possible to stop that. And that irreversibility, I think, is something that probably is the thing that keeps me most up at night. And I think this is obviously the scientific challenge we have to respond to. And we know from the IPCC that the decisions we make today will determine the future for thousands of years. And I think one thing we've learned since Paris, if I may, is, and maybe that's speaking from a climate community, and that's more moving into the implementation and into the how, is the importance of bringing the social and the climate issues together in the implementation. It seems such an obvious point now, but I still see it doesn't always happen. And I think they need these climate-related policies. Well, they need to be designed to maximize economic growth and social benefit. And I think only through that and going through those steps will we see the pace and scale required actually occur, and limit the opportunity for political point scoring that often can threaten to derail. And this is a challenge not only for policymakers, but I think also for our national politics, and doing something at this scale because we have waited so long to really get moving. First climate report in the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson's desk, 1965. Right now we're looking at how fast we have to move on that pace and scale of change, and we have to have people at the center. Now there's good news. I think it's pretty clear 85% of new power plants are renewable. Solar and wind are cheaper than any other source of energy. This enables really much more, I think. And I think that was beginning in Paris, that sense that this isn't just a cost, but also can bring multiple benefits. And I think the IPCC has brought that together. But that piece, I think, is so important. We know the investments can pay off. Every euro invested in climate action prevents 6 times as much climate-related damage, according to the Potsdam Institute. I think it's really about being courageous and decisive enough in politics and in policy making to seize it. I think in Europe, we see now we're of course in final stages of what's going to happen in Brussels, who gets which assignment. But I think it's quite clear from President von der Leyen that the Green Deal is moving forward and that a clean industrial plan is really a key part of that. And I think for Europe, I can speak certainly for Germany, this is a critical part and piece of the puzzle. It's one that we talk about here quite a lot in Germany, but also internationally. I thought, speaking to you a day after the Draghi report has just come out, if you haven't, I'm sure you all have seen or are aware of that. It's looking really at how to decarbonize European industry across the board while also continuing economic prosperity and growth. It's not a choice. We have to move forward on this together. And we have quite a lot still to do, although I do want to say I think the way that Europe has moved forward in accelerating our energy transition after the Russian aggression into Ukraine is also something that has demonstrated that we should be acting with self-confidence, that when we decide to do something, we actually can really deliver when we work together. And I think that's going to be that kind of spirit that we need in the new commission, and I have confidence that President von der Leyen will drive us forward. I wanted to say a little bit about finance. I don't know if there's finance people in the room, but how can you talk about this without talking about finance, right? So we know right now, okay, we need a global effort, but we know also that 90% of green investments, well, they go to developed countries in China, right? And this is what we have to change. Because without significant financial flows going to developing countries, I think that that will, of course, hamper a just transition of those countries and the growth opportunities that are there in renewables, the jobs, especially for youth. I spent quite a bit of time last weekend while I was in South Africa last week, and it's left me with many impressions about how first to put people at the center, how the Just Energy Transition Partnership can work together, how countries on the traditional kind of contributor side can work on eye level, responding to a proposal from a very important developing country and chart a way forward. And I have to say I'm very optimistic after the election and seeing how South Africa is moving together. And I think that project is a good example of how we need to become much more sophisticated in how we deal with climate finance across the board. And because, yes, we need to be working on public finance, and I think there's another area where Germany and France have really been taking the lead, if I may. I hear it all around the world that the two of us are really at the pinnacle of things. But we know that public finance alone isn't going to do the trick. And so within the negotiations this year, there is a very important opportunity for us to be stepping back and looking at how we use this discussion, which is about what is the new financial goal that we set, the 100 billion goal, what comes next, but to use that very challenging negotiation. I think it will test, and we'll have to dig into our Paris spirit quite a lot, but how all of the different pieces are there. And we're looking at a multi-layered approach that actually names, okay, what are we looking for in terms of the investments that are needed? And then we look at what does that actually require? What kind of international financial institution reform? so much about debt. I hear so much. There's no fiscal space for many developing countries to be moving into being more resilient, to having funding to actually be investing in the transformation. What are we going to do about leveraging private finance? Let's get much more serious and real here. And what are the innovative sources of finance? And there, I think, again, the French president hosting the big finance meeting last year has kind of catapulted a whole bunch of different important initiatives. We need to bring those together and work together with the most vulnerable countries and countries in debt to find those solutions so that we can be unlocking that new international financial goal. And I think they're also on, and maybe this could be an area we could discuss on private sector. Germany recently did a soft launch of a green guarantee group because we heard from so many about what the need is to reduce the cost of capital. Really, President Ruto at the Africa Climate Summit made that point, but it's well known. And so we want to look together. It's a platform to bring together a wide range of stakeholders to better understand and overcome the limits of the use of guarantees in financing the green transition. So I think that's a key area. Space to watch, G20 Finance and Climate Task Force. This is, I think, a very worthy effort by the Brazilian presidency to bring together the finance ministries and the climate or the foreign affairs. We have the lead on the negotiations here in Germany in foreign affairs together, in order to say, okay, let's have the real conversation about finance. How are we going to scale up renewables? What do we need to do in order to build and get restoration? How are we going to bring in resilience across the board? And that task force, I think if the G20 obviously can be tackling that issue, that's the place for that to happen. And hopefully that can also build some momentum for this year's COP, because this year, I think it's very clear that developed countries, I think the European Union, 60% of climate finance from the EU, we're ready to continue to take the lead. But if you look at historical emissions and you look at the economic situation of countries since 1992 or even since Copenhagen, it's clear we need contributions from a larger group of countries coming in. So perhaps the other piece on Paris, before I pivot just slightly, is what I see as really the heart of the Paris Agreement, which is the ratchet mechanism. So when I was in Paris, I was heading up the climate program at the World Resources Institute. And we had done convenings around the world. I think I was in 14 countries in I don't know how much time, with stakeholders and with government. What should this agreement look like? And there were a lot of concerns about the fact that, unlike Kyoto, there are no legally binding targets for countries. And so the ratchet mechanism of coming back every 5 years to increase ambition for the NDCs, because we know that some countries will put in high targets, some countries will put in lower targets, which is always the risk in this, that this ratchet mechanism was absolutely critical for the agreement, combined with the measuring, reporting, and verification provisions that were there. And now we're in the cycle. So next year, all countries have to come forward with their nationally determined contributions. I've been working to, I think one key thing that we need to do is be connecting the dots. Today over at our business forum, I was explaining what is an NDC. I mean, this is kind of classic UN language that doesn't translate into actually, they are investment plans. And so working across in the coming months so that we can be scaling up, having an upward spiral of ambition for the 2035 targets is, a top priority for us and in Germany and the European Union. And there, I think we can do much with good diplomacy, climate diplomacy, but I think actually looking at economic diplomacy is going to be more important than ever for the G20 and others to be moving forward. Lastly, maybe just to say a little bit about very briefly, our climate foreign policy. So Germany last year in November, our cabinet approved our climate foreign policy. I think it's our first ever. I think it's There aren't that many out there in the world, actually, and I think what we really worked to do was to make it as all-encompassing as possible, because while it's about emissions, et cetera, it's actually about transforming our economies, and as in the foreign policy world, we need to be using every single lever that we have, whether it be trade, whether it be business collaboration, looking at our humanitarian aid, what we're doing there, the development side, our agriculture ministry, our research and development ministry, we all put together goals and indicators that we're working towards as a government so that we can keep that 1.5 degree goal within sight and build resilience in solidarity with the most vulnerable, which is a top priority for Germany. And there, I think a key piece of that are partnerships. We are living and working very much in a multipolar world. And so they're working together with a whole range of partners in this shifting, I like to say, I think the geopolitics of energy are shifting beneath our feet. If you look at which countries now all of a sudden can become energy providers because they have sun and wind and minerals, and which of those that have been the long-standing suppliers of energy are looking at how to diversify their economies, some slower and some faster. Those dynamics and how we build together the coalitions for change, I think, is really at the core of it. And so those geopolitical implications and challenges is key. Also looking at the security implications of climate change is very important as well. Germany is very active in that field. Everything from, bringing in climate scientists into peace-building missions in the Sahel or Sudan, a whole range of things. So I guess my point there is really, I think the Paris Agreement, in a way, it closed a chapter and enabled the world to work together in this new hybrid format where countries could go at their and needed to go at their same speed. You had equity at the center of the whole thing. But now we're at another tipping point, I think. We're on the cusp, I would say, of a great transformation, but the cusp will remain a cusp and not actually move into the pace and scale that we need unless we have the kind of radical collaboration that we need. I think that was the spirit of the Paris Agreement, the courage, the determination, the decisiveness for people to go beyond their comfort zones and say, okay, I never thought I would say this, but I'm going to move because I know what we're facing. That's the spirit of collaboration we need today more than ever. And again, I think that's what Franco-German collaboration is also all about. And having experts, having the private sector engaged in that so that we can accelerate the learning and move forward in a fair, just, and effective way. I'm sure that's what this is all about. So thank you very much.
Mike Wilkins.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was excellent. Mike Wilkins from Imperial. Just a question, or maybe your views related to a comment you made about leadership in climate negotiations. And I think you quite rightly mentioned the success that Paris was largely down to the diplomatic skills of the French, and I totally agree with you there. But one thing I would like to hear from you is more recent COPs have been in Dubai. It's going to be in Baku this year, Azerbaijan. Do you think those types of countries have the leadership required to move the agenda forward in climate action?
On the first part of what you said, maybe my addition would be that I think what made Paris successful was the ecosystem of actors that work together around a common goal. So whether it be the activists, whether it be the business community, whether it be different governments, I think it was that sense of collaboration around that common goal that was there to get that agreement done and for it to be as ambitious as it possibly could be was so important. And I think that's also the kind of spirit we need in the implementation here. I think the leadership question is a fundamental one. COP presidents, I think, need to be, in the end, judged on what they actually succeed on. in their presidency. I think COP28, in a way, perhaps was a surprise, but I think achieving a transition away from fossil fuels in Dubai under that presidency of the UAE demonstrated that they did lift their game and really worked to achieve something that sent a clear signal, along with the tripling of renewables and the doubling. I think at the end of the day, I think these COPs are so important, not only for the negotiations, which of course are very important, but they're also become the place where people go who want to seek solutions. And I think there's, as I said, the negotiations, and I'm, looking forward to seeing how Azerbaijan steps into a leadership role on this new collective quantified goal, which will be one of the most complex, very challenging negotiations that I think we've had for a long time. And Germany stands ready to step into that. I think that moving that forward will, judge them on the outcome at the end of the day. But the COPs are much more than the presidencies. I think leadership right now is coming from all different kind of corners of the earth. And I think that's what I'm very lucky is that I travel a lot in this job, and my last job, I had a lot to do with volunteers and people who are working every single day. And I think, yes, we need the leaders at the heads of state level, absolutely. And we need more of them. And I think the NDCs will be, in a way, a litmus test, because in the end, these nationally determined contributions require political leadership to balance out all the national interests that are coming at you and rise above them, if I may. But I also very much see leadership as a shared leadership piece across the board.
Patrick Bolton. I'm also from Imperial College.
And also, please let me know what you all think. I'm here with experts, so I'm keen to.
So I wanted to respond to your idea and the notion of radical cooperation. One example of radical cooperation that's been very successful is the cooperation among central banks and supervisors, the NGFS. And when you see that success, you have to ask, why is it happening with central banks when in fact economists have been saying it's none of their business? And why isn't it not happening in ministries of finance? Why isn't it happening in other arms of government? More natural. That seems to me is a big missing piece. And coming to your point about the business community not understanding what NDCs are, I think what they're not seeing, what they find difficult, what businesses find difficult, is to understand on a granular level the pathway. What are you going to phase out, and what are you going to phase in, when, in what sequence? And this is where I think, a form of indicative planning coming from ministries of finance would be extremely big step forward.
I agree. I also think in banks themselves, because a lot of it is still voluntary.
Tom Gosling, not from Imperial. I'm from LSE and ECGI. There's been a number of times today it's come up that business and investors need policymakers to put the right frameworks and incentives in place to enable, finance flows to do what's needed for the transition. But if I was to turn that around, as someone who is involved in the incredibly complicated and difficult process of getting those policies in place, what is it that you really need from the finance sector and from the corporate sector to facilitate the creation of that regulatory and policy framework?
I think engagement. I think understanding, in a way, getting a bit, rolling up the sleeves and getting into the national processes that are underway in countries, I mean, maybe that's my first point. I'll come to finance in a second. I think because these nationally determined contributions really can and should, they're at different levels, but really be setting the signals. So if you're looking to be growing renewables in countries around the world, for example, in your renewable energy company or an energy company, then you should understand when are the decisions going to be made in these countries, and then be engaging also in the public domain. So I think one of the key things that is that we need more of today are actually businesses, but also mayors, entrepreneurs, et cetera, talking about what's working. Giving examples of how they have created a new company, how they have, how many jobs they've created with that, doing that on the local level, telling their stories, of the opportunity and the benefits that it can bring to people. And I think that in a time frame of the decision-making process that's going on is incredibly important. I mean, at the end of the day, this is about our stability and our national and our security to get this moving, but also for companies to say, hey, these are the opportunities that I'm seeing. This is what I've already done. If I actually last year going into the COP, a German company said to me, I need clarity on renewable energy. We want to go, and I need to know it's going to be part of the future, and I need to know that there's going to be renewable policy in different countries around the world. Tripling of renewable energy, 11 terawatts. Right now, it's about bringing that into the NDCs so that you can actually get those policy frameworks there. So that kind of engagement with policymakers themselves, but then also the public engagement, I think, in helping shape what kind of economy we're trying to build together for people, I think is incredibly important and needs more work. And I think on the finance side, I think we need more financial sector actors that are actually seeing what the transition plans are, and are looking into deciding what they invest in based on whether it is zero carbon or green, whatever taxonomy you want to use. And so, because at the end of the day, it is about shifting those funds. And as long as the funds continue to be going into the fossil economy, it makes it more difficult, I think, for policymakers to then be making decisions that bring about stranded assets. So let's get more real about the stranded assets conversation and move forward on that side of things, and also be engaging in developing countries in this discussion that we're having right now, and working with government on, for example, how can we be more strategically deploying instruments like guarantees? How do we, getting your, hands dirty on, okay, here's X country. It has bombastic ambition to go in this direction. The financing is not coming. How do we actually do this? And then having an example that then we can be using. I know there are already many there, but I don't see it as part of the regular discourse, perhaps. And so those are two ideas that I think would be helpful in moving us into the direction of let's just get to work and get this done. And to be loud in parliaments, and to be briefing media, and to be talking to stakeholders, all of those change actors that are there, all of those leaders in the field. Don't think that people know what you're doing. Talk about it. Brief people, tell them about the opportunity, tell them about the challenges, be honest about it, but get those examples out there. Yeah.
Agnes Voisard, I'm actually a computer scientist at the Free University of Berlin and at Fraunhofer. So in fact, I had a remark. It's kind of orthogonal to what we have said before. And for me, there's some kind of dichotomy between all these huge delegations flying to these events like the COPs and our kids who refuse to take the plane to go on vacation. It happens to all of us, to many of my friends as well. And this is a real problem. So to get back to the topic of this event, is it really responsible to do that?
Yes, it is. It's responsible to bring a delegation that's negotiating the most important treaty in the world right now. It's responsible to, of course, look and manage the size of your delegation. We do that extremely actively in Germany. I can tell you I have difficult conversations with other actors about how many people can actually come on the German delegation. But it is our duty to go and be part of these negotiations. And I think the thing that's hard for people who aren't involved in this to understand, and I get your dichotomy completely, is that the negotiations there's the negotiations, but what people use the negotiations and the space for is their annual meeting on whatever it is. And there's negotiations that are across so many parts of the economy that I can say from our delegation perspective, I want to make sure I have my expert on, we're negotiating the carbon markets. I need negotiators, experts on that. I need finance experts. I need mitigation experts. So I think it behooves all of us to make sure that the people who come have to be there on the government side. But I think it's also important to see what are all the different components that are being negotiated, what that requires, and then also that the COPs have become, in a way, a place for people to come who want to make a difference. There are people who come who want to block progress, of course, as well. But I think the majority of people who go there use the COP as a space to collaborate, to find new solutions, to launch new initiatives. And in some ways, it's an efficient way for them all to come together instead of, because they might be there anyway, than for them to fly to 6 different places. So it needs to be, measured. I mean, measurable, but it also, I think, my gosh, as far as an important negotiation right now and the complexity of these negotiations, then I think we have a duty to make sure we're doing a good job and driving the agenda.
I'm Rob Engel, and I guess I wonder, do you think there's any life in the negotiation to reduce subsidies for fossil energy?
There is life. I mean, it was part of the agreement last year in a carefully worded way. I think it has to be done, though, in an incredibly sensitive way vis-a-vis many different countries. I mean, because I think the language that was agreed at the end had to do with social impacts, avoiding social impacts of the reduction of subsidies. And so I think there's policy work I know there's lots of policy research out there on subsidies. I don't think it has enough life that it's going to be going to happen in this next months, but I think we have to stay on it because it's irrational to be subsidizing fossil fuels while we're trying to phase them out, right?
It's historical and it's not current, and
it demonstrates, but I think the
governments can use the money probably.
And probably, but I think I would put a price on CO2, put in an emission system, auction the permits, and reinvest in your economy. That would be my suggestion. So stay on it.
So we can have a final question. Sophie, yes,
It was
please.
Engel, though. I have a question on Africa in particular. I work with an African fund that's a mix of government investment and private investment. The challenges have been and focused on the transition, on infrastructure and the transition in about 35 countries in the continent. And the challenges in the last 6 years has been to raise equity capital. It hasn't been just the financing part. So project financing, we found profitable opportunities. But it's the funding of development of projects, which are high risk, very costly, and a lot of the governments are not supporting that in the way that they could be. And the second is the lack of focus on equity capital. That many very, very innovative companies need. And also the capacity, which I find amazing in the continent on some of the infrastructure, how they're leapfrogging on both the technologies, some of the infrastructure, innovation in border passing that reduces carbon emissions. So I'd just be curious, because Germany plays a very important role. It's considered really one of the top funders. But what do you see if you want to reach that goal in terms of supporting the continent and the solutions that these kind of funds would need, or the actions these organizations could take to get that kind of private capital and public capital from developed economies?
Well, I think you are in the midst of it all. I think you have probably. I'd be curious what you think is needed. No, seriously. I mean, I think a dialogue is. I think what. I think, and it goes beyond the financing. So I can speak to the areas that I'm most familiar with, because I'm not a deep finance expert. But I think it's looking at what that mix is. The preparation of the projects is something that I know more funds are willing to fund. The Green Climate Fund has started to do that kind of thing. Okay, so which I think is essential for countries across the board, also in SIDS as well, and that shouldn't be underestimated how important that is. And then really looking at how to be doing that leveraging, whether it be through equity or looking at the concessional finance that's available. And that's, I think, where Germany is working to be bringing highly concessional finance into very important strategic areas of infrastructure. Actually, last week, Joachim Flassbach said this in a press conference. So, I mean, we were in South Africa, and it's very clear that they have a massive, every country, I mean, one of the biggest barriers are the grids, right? And so South Africa has a massive challenge to build a grid, building, so many different issues. But what Germany was able to do then is to say, okay, KfW, if there is moving forward with Eskom in a way that identifies a plan to be going in this direction, if the finance ministry, right, comes in and approves something like this, then Germany is willing to step in and see what more we could be doing on highly concessional funding for that kind of a project, which is just essential for South Africa. And I think more of that kind of strategic thinking around those types of big investments is needed. The other two pieces, which are linked, but is really, again, the policy framework piece, which I think that was one of the, Germany does a lot of policy-based loans. And I think they've been quite successful in countries where you can now see, okay, over the years now the policies are in place and the investments are starting to come. And then the last is investing in the skill labor. Really taking, it's a big focus of our development ministry right now across many countries in Africa. And we know it here, right? I mean, you grow renewables, Germany's at 60% right now in our grid. Do we have the engineers? Do we have the installers? And so I think that's another key piece of the puzzle, which is a bit different than your question, but I want to mention it because I think it often gets forgotten, but actually it's absolutely fundamental for the transformation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I'm afraid all good things come to a close, and we have to close the conference. So it's very difficult to sum up a day like this, but you always take away some notions, words, concepts. So let me pick up one of yours. So Paris, what has Paris changed? It's changed the narrative. So I've changed my mind since the introduction. So it's changed the narrative, and that's very important. And I think we know more, and we also know what to do. So that's one thing to take away. I think we all take away termination risk. I think it's a very good term. I actually think your lecture, Rob, showed that we don't have enough of it. And if I may say, Christophe, your choice between renewables and gas turbines, I wish you would feel the termination risk a bit more forcefully. And on the other hand, we do need also we didn't talk about the other risk, which is the risk of actually investing in renewables. And I was surprised that you find that a risky proposition. And in some sense, we need to think about, why does a company like Siemens Energy think that its acquisition of a wind turbine company in Spain is a risky business proposition? I mean, something is not quite right here. Now, the other term, and I'm really laying it on now, the other term I really liked is radical collaboration. I really did like that term. And, maybe that needs to include some countries that are big carbon emitters we don't want to talk to for other reasons. But, we kind of can't do it without talking to them. So maybe radical collaboration actually is a term that can have many interpretations. Let me leave it at that. Let's say a final thing. I also think we all have a duty to go forth and, not multiply, maybe multiply, but we have a duty to go forth and actually tell the story. And personally, I discovered all of this quite recently through a study of the global divestment movement. And I now teach every single class I teach. I teach 4 master classes. Nobody walks out there without knowing what the carbon budget is, how large our emissions are per year, and what carbon emissions and carbon sinks are, and what you can do or not do about it. So I think if, just the professors in the world, every single professor in the world did this, and at schools, that would make a big difference. And I think, the NDCs, we will leave that for the advanced class. Okay? Let's stick with the CO2 emissions. So that being aside, let me just thank people. So first of all, let me thank Rob Engler and Marianne, his wife, for coming over. Sorry, they did come over on a plane, but I think that was important. It was important to get this message, and certainly having people like you devote time, which you didn't have to do because you already had the prize. For you devoting the time and your reputation and your thoughts to this topic is really very important, because it lends, first of all, it give your thoughts to this subject, but you also lend your personal credibility to this subject and thinking about it, which is important, as we've seen here today. Now, and may I say, I wish more Nobel Prize winners would do this. I'm sure a lot of them do. Maybe they should make this a condition for... No, okay. Okay. So the other person to thank is, of course, the ambassador, François Delattre, and Sophie Lelias, for hosting us here at this incredibly embassy. And, as a German, the German-French collaboration, I repeat this, it's had quite a history, and to see, to hear again, that this is alive and working, and also on an everyday basis, is just so important for us to move forward. And, may the radical collaboration on this front continue. Now, ECGI is a non-profit. Most people don't get paid. We do pay the staff. Doing an event like this is not free of charge, so we do need support. And we had support. We have general support. First of all, we have patrons. We have AstraZeneca, our investor, the Wallenberg Group, who are our patrons on an ongoing basis. And then we had sponsors for this event. So we had Auxera, with whom we have actually now a strategic partnership. We had BNP Paribas. We had the European Research Council through Imperial College and Patrick Bolton, and Imperial College also, the Climate Centre, Mike Wilkins, also helped with this, and we couldn't have done it without you, so thank you. I've thanked the ambassador already, but I'd also wish to thank the embassy staff, in particular Claire and Baptiste, who were involved in this since actually 18 months ago. I think that's when we started. And of course, the ECGI staff were there in the back. Okay, so maybe I should call you that, but okay, they're there in the back. Elaine McPartlin, Suzanne, and her team. And finally, let me say, of course, let me thank Herman, our chair, and say that, as he said in the beginning, as I said, ECGI is a non-profit. We are open access, so everything, all the recordings, the materials, the papers, the slides will be made available free of charge, as we always do on ECGI Global. So there is a record also, and people do go back at times. We went today back to COP1 and looked at a photo, yes, of the then Environment Minister Angela Merkel. Okay. So the record is there, so you will be able to visit it. And then looking forward to the next summit, as was mentioned, we started this one 18 months ago. We are actually setting up a patrons council where we are going to work with our patrons to prepare the next summit. So AstraZeneca and Investor have already signed up to this patrons council. We will limit this to 12. So there is a queue already. So if any of you are interested to join the Patrons Council, which we're going to organize with Auxera to prepare the next summit, please come and talk to us. We are very happy to receive expressions of interest. So thank you very much for this, and thank you again, Jennifer Morgan, for your very inspiring, energizing speech. And I wish we had more of those. And I hope that I'm not going to make a political statement at the French embassy and mention the other debate that's going to go on later on. So I wish we had more of those speeches every day. Thank you very much.